For 10 years, Amina believed she had everything. A loving husband, a peaceful home, and a marriage that others in the village envied. But what happens when the foundation of love is built on lies? What happens when a secret so deep, so hidden, begins to surface, tearing apart the life you thought was perfect? Amina had always trusted Musa. From the moment they were married, he had been nothing but a devoted husband. He was different from the other men in the village. He never made her feel small, never made her question her worth. He protected her, provided for her, and showered her with gifts after every trip he took. He worked hard, traveled often, and always came back with beautiful things, a golden bracelet, a fine silk dress, perfumes from faraway cities. She never had to ask. He always knew what she wanted. In a village where many women struggled to find a husband who respected them, Amina felt blessed. She heard the whispers of admiration, the envy in the eyes of the women who watched her. Amina as the perfect husband, they would say. She must have done something good in her past life to deserve such love. And Amina believed them. Every morning, she would wake up before the sun, prepare Musa's breakfast, and see him off before he left for work. And every night, she would wait for him, eager to hear the stories of his travels, of the places he had been, of the people he had met. He never told her much, just enough to keep her curious, but not enough to make her ask more. She never questioned it. After all, he was a hardworking man. And if he kept his work life separate, it was because he wanted to protect her from the burdens of the outside world. At least, that's what he always said. But the truth is, love can blind you. Love can make you ignore the small cracks, the whispers of doubt, the tiny inconsistencies that should have made you ask questions. And Amina was about to learn that love, no matter how strong, could never erase the truth. The first time she felt something was wrong, it was small. So small that she pushed it aside, buried it deep in her mind, convincing herself it was nothing. One evening, as she was folding Musa's clothes, she noticed something. A faint scent of perfume, one she didn't recognize. It wasn't the kind she wore, nor the kind she had ever smelled before. It clung to his shirt, delicate but unmistakable. She hesitated, her fingers lingering over the fabric. Then she shook her head and folded it neatly. Maybe it's from the marketplace, she told herself. Maybe he brushed past someone, and the scent stayed. Days passed. Weeks. And the thought faded, swallowed by the routine of life. But then, something else happened. It was early morning. Musa was packing for another trip, his movements hurried, his hands folding his clothes with practiced ease. Amina stood by the door, watching him, her arms crossed. And then, without thinking, the words slipped from her lips. Musa, why have you never taken me to your workplace? It was a simple question. An innocent one. But the way Musa reacted, that was not innocent at all. He froze for just a fraction of a second. A moment so brief that if she hadn't been watching him closely, she would have missed it. Then, just as quickly, he recovered. He smiled, zipped up his bag, and turned to her, his voice smooth as always. Because it's not a place for you, my love. The city is dangerous. I travel so you don't have to. I do this to protect you. Amina nodded. Of course, he was protecting her. He always protected her. But as she stood there, watching him walk away, something inside her shifted. A quiet unease. A question she couldn't quite form, but one that lingered in the back of her mind. And once a question enters your mind, it never truly leaves. That night, Amina couldn't sleep. She turned on her mat, staring at the ceiling, listening to the quiet sounds of the village outside. The wind rustled through the trees, the distant laughter of night traders echoed in the streets. And then, she heard it. A voice. A hushed whisper. Her body tensed. She turned her head slightly, focusing. It was coming from the next room. Musa's voice. She sat up, careful not to make a sound. Slowly, she got up and walked to the doorway, pressing her ear against the wood. And what she heard made her blood run cold. No, she doesn't know. I've kept it hidden for this long. No one must ever find out. Amina's breath caught in her throat. Her fingers dug into the wooden frame. Her heart pounded so loudly in her chest that she was afraid Musa might hear it through the walls. She wanted to push open the door, to demand answers. But she didn't. She stood there, frozen, listening. Yes. I'll be back soon. Don't worry. I love you too. Amina's whole body went still. I love you too. The words slammed into her like a storm, knocking the air from her lungs. Who was he talking to? Who was he saying those words to? Because for 10 years, she had been the only woman in his life. At least, that's what she thought. She stumbled back, heart racing. Her mind spun with 1,000 possibilities. But deep down, she already knew. She just didn't want to believe it. When Musa finally came to bed that night, he kissed her forehead like he always did. He wrapped his arms around her like he always did. He whispered, "Good night, my love," like he always did. But for the first time in 10 years, Amina did not feel safe in his arms. The next morning, Amina woke up with a decision. She could not ignore this anymore. She could not silence the questions, the doubts, the feeling in her chest that screamed something was terribly, terribly wrong. For 10 years, she had never questioned Musa. But today, she would. And so, as the sun rose over the village, as Musa walked out the door for another trip, Amina did something she had never done before. She followed him. The morning was quiet, like any other. The sun had barely risen over the village, casting long golden rays across the rooftops. The air was crisp, carrying the distant laughter of early risers, the chatter of traders setting up their stalls. But Amina was not paying attention to any of it. Today was different. Today, she was not just saying goodbye to her husband, she was following him. Her hands trembled as she adjusted her shawl, pulling it over her head. She had never done this before. In 10 years of marriage, she had never once questioned where Musa went. She had never followed him, never tried to uncover his secrets. But that was before. Before the whispers in the night. Before the scent of unfamiliar perfume. Before the cold feeling in her chest that told her something was terribly, terribly wrong. She kept her distance as he walked through the village, careful to stay in the shadows, ducking behind market stalls and trees. Her heart pounded with every step, the sound loud in her ears. What was she doing? What was she hoping to find? Maybe she was wrong. Maybe she was overthinking everything. Maybe she would follow him and realize there was nothing to worry about after all. But deep down, deep in the part of her heart that had been uneasy for months, she knew she wouldn't. The village roads faded behind them. The scenery began to change. The dirt paths turned into paved streets, the modest village huts replaced by grander buildings. They were heading toward the city, a place Amina rarely visited. She felt small among the towering structures, the wide roads, the unfamiliar faces passing her by. But she couldn't stop now. Musa walked with ease, with confidence, as if this was his world. A world she had never been allowed to enter. A world he had kept hidden from her. And then he stopped. Amina quickly ducked behind a wall, pressing her back against the cold surface. Her breath came out in short, uneven gasps as she peeked around the corner. In front of her stood a mansion. Not just a house. Not just a comfortable home. A mansion. Tall gates, marble floors, and balconies that gleamed under the morning light. This was not the home of a simple businessman. This was the home of someone who had wealth. Someone who had status. Someone who had a life she knew nothing about. Amina's fingers curled into fists. Her heart pounded against her ribs. Why was Musa here? And then, she saw them. The front doors of the mansion opened, and a woman stepped out. She was beautiful. Graceful. Dressed in the finest fabrics Amina had ever seen. Her hair was long, braided with gold threads, her wrist adorned with bangles that shimmered in the sun. And as she walked down the grand staircase, she was smiling. Smiling at Musa. Amina's breath hitched. Her vision blurred. She pressed herself harder against the wall, feeling as though the ground beneath her feet was crumbling away. Then, the final blow. 2 children rushed forward. Laughing. Running. Their small feet pattering against the polished steps. And before Amina could even process what was happening, they flung themselves into Musa's arms, their voices bright, full of love. Papa. Amina's world shattered. Papa. The word echoed in her mind, over and over again, until it became a dull, unbearable ache. Her stomach twisted. Her knees felt weak. This wasn't real. It couldn't be real. And yet, it was happening right before her eyes. Musa, her Musa, was standing there, smiling, holding these children in his arms, kissing their foreheads as if they were his whole world. But he already had a world. Amina was his world. Their home. Their marriage. Their life together. So who was this woman? Who were these children? And why did they call him Papa? Amina couldn't move. She couldn't breathe. She wanted to run, wanted to scream, wanted to demand answers. But all she could do was stand there, hidden in the shadows, watching as the man she had loved for 10 years lived a life she never knew existed. Minutes passed. Maybe hours. She wasn't sure. Time had lost meaning. She watched as they laughed together, as they spoke in whispers, as they disappeared inside the house like a perfect little family. A family that didn't include her. Amina clenched her fist. She had spent years defending Musa, loving him, trusting him. She had never once questioned his love, never once suspected that he could betray her. And yet, here he was. Smiling with another woman. Holding another woman's children. Living a double life while she waited for him at home, believing he was out working to provide for them. A deep, suffocating rage began to rise in her chest. This wasn't just a betrayal. This was a theft. He had stolen years from her. He had stolen her trust. He had stolen the life she thought she had. And for what? For this secret family. For a love he had been too much of a coward to confess. Amina wanted to march up to that house. She wanted to throw open those grand doors and demand to know why. Why had he done this to her? Why had he lied for so long? Why had he let her live in the dark while he basked in the light of another life? But she didn't. Not yet. Instead, she turned around and walked away. Because now, she had a choice to make. And whatever choice she made, Musa was going to pay. Amina walked home in a daze. Her feet moved, but her mind was stuck in the moment she had just witnessed. The moment that shattered everything. The moment she realized she had been living a lie. She could still hear their laughter ringing in her ears. The laughter of the woman who smiled so effortlessly at Musa. The laughter of the children who clung to him like he was their whole world. A world Amina had never been part of. A world that had existed behind her back for years. Her hands trembled as she pushed open the door to her home. The home she had thought was built on love and truth. Now, it felt like nothing more than a house filled with memories of a life that never truly existed. She sat down, staring at the walls, at the pictures of her and Musa smiling. Fake. All of it. Just a cruel, beautiful illusion. And then, the emotions hit her. First came the shock. The numb disbelief that made her chest feel hollow. That made her want to convince herself that maybe, just maybe, she had imagined it all. But no. She had seen it with her own eyes. Then came the sadness. The deep, aching sorrow of a woman who had loved with her whole heart, only to be discarded like she meant nothing. Like she was just a piece of a life he could so easily walk away from whenever he pleased. And finally, the anger. It was slow at first, creeping in like a rising storm. But the more she thought about it, the more she replayed the scene in her mind, the more it consumed her. How dare he? How dare he do this to her? To their marriage. To the life they had built together. He had stood before her every day for 10 years, looking into her eyes, telling her he loved her. He had kissed her, held her, made her believe she was his only one. And the whole time, he was sharing his love with another woman. Sharing his time. His body. His future. And not just her, he had children. He had raised them, given them a life, while she had spent every night alone in an empty bed, waiting for him to return from his so-called business trips. Her fingers curled into fists. No. She would not be silent. She would not pretend. She would not let him walk through that door and lie to her face again. Musa had played his game well. But now, it was Amina's turn. That evening, Amina prepared dinner as she always did. Not because she wanted to, no, she could barely stand to look at the food in front of her, but because she wanted Musa to think everything was normal. She wanted him to walk in and believe that nothing had changed. That his secret was still safe. She set the table, lit the lanterns, and sat in the dim glow of the room, waiting. And waiting. And waiting. Finally, long past sunset, the door creaked open. Musa stepped inside, his face tired, his expression calm. The sight of him, so comfortable, so unbothered, made Amina's stomach churn. Did he have any idea what he had done to her? Did he feel any guilt? Any shame? Oh, my love, he said, smiling as he set his bag down. I'm home. Home. The word stung like fire. Amina watched as he loosened his shirt, stretching his arms like he was returning from a hard day's walk. She watched as he walked over, leaning down to kiss her forehead like he had always done. But before his lips could even brush against her skin, she flinched away. For the first time in 10 years, she rejected his touch. Musa's smile faltered. He frowned, his eyes searching hers. Amina. What's wrong? Wrong. Everything was wrong. Their marriage was a lie. Their love was a joke. And the man standing before her was nothing more than a stranger. Amina stood slowly, her chair scraping against the floor. She looked at him, not with love, not with admiration, but with the cold, burning rage of a woman scorned. Where were you today, Musa? His eyebrows furrowed. What do you mean? I told you, I was working. She let out a soft laugh. But there was no humor in it. Just bitterness. Working. Is that what you call it? Musa's jaw tightened. He stepped back slightly, as if sensing the change in her tone. Amina, what's going on? She didn't answer. Instead, she reached into her pocket and pulled out something small, something she had picked up from the mansion's gates. A golden bracelet. The kind of bracelet only a wife would wear. The kind of bracelet that matched the one Musa had given her years ago. She held it up between them, letting the lantern's glow reflect off its polished surface. Then she looked at him. Waiting. For a long moment, Musa said nothing. His face remained unreadable. But Amina saw it. The flicker of panic in his eyes. The way his throat bobbed as he swallowed hard. The way his hands clenched into fists at his sides. "Where did you get that?" he finally asked, his voice quieter now. Amina's fingers tightened around the bracelet. "I think you already know the answer to that." Silence. Heavy. Suffocating. The weight of 10 years of deception pressing down on both of them. Musa exhaled slowly, running a hand down his face. "Amina, please." "Please, what?" she snapped. "Please, let you lie to me again. Please, let you walk through this door and pretend like you haven't been living another life behind my back." He opened his mouth, but she didn't let him speak. "You have a wife, Musa. A family. Children. And you thought I would never find out." Musa flinched. His shoulders dropped. And then, in the quietest voice, he said it. "I never wanted to hurt you." The words made Amina's blood boil. She slammed the bracelet onto the table, the metal clinking loudly. 10 years, Musa. 10 years. Do you know what that means? It means I built my life around a lie. It means I waited for you, I loved you, I trusted you, while you... Her voice cracked. Her vision blurred with tears. But she refused to cry. Not in front of him. Musa looked at her, his face filled with regret. "Amina. I married her first." And there it was. The truth. The final betrayal. Amina's hands trembled. Her heart felt like it was breaking all over again. He had married her first. That meant she was the other woman. The second choice. The afterthought. She took a step back, shaking her head. "I don't know who you are anymore." Musa reached for her. "Please. Let me explain." But Amina didn't want an explanation. Not anymore. She turned away, her mind racing, her heart heavy. She had followed him hoping to find answers. And now, she had. But what was she supposed to do with them? The truth had been spoken. It hung between them like a blade, sharp and merciless. Musa had married her first. He had built a life with her before Amina had ever existed in his world. She had spent 10 years loving a man who had already given his heart, his vows, his future, to someone else. Amina stood there, staring at him, her mind racing, her body trembling. The house that once felt like a home now felt like a prison. The walls, the furniture, the memories, everything felt tainted, poisoned by the truth she had just uncovered. She had always believed that love was the foundation of marriage. That trust was the unbreakable thread that held two souls together. But now she knew love could be a lie. Trust could be shattered. And marriage. Marriage could be nothing more than a carefully woven illusion. Musa was still speaking. She could see his lips moving, forming words, please, excuses, apologies. But she didn't hear them. She didn't want to hear them. Her heartbeat was too loud in her ears, her emotions too overwhelming. "Amina, please. I never wanted to hurt you." "Hurt me?" Amina let out a laugh, sharp, bitter, filled with a pain so deep it made her chest ache. "You never wanted to hurt me," she repeated, her voice shaking with disbelief. "Musa, you lied to me for 10 years. You let me love you, build a life with you, while you had another family, another wife. And you never wanted to hurt me." Musa's eyes dropped to the floor, shame washing over his face. "I was young. I made mistakes. But Amina, I love you. I love both of you. Both of you." The words hit her harder than a slap. Her fingers clenched into fists at her sides, her nails digging into her skin. He loved them both. He had divided his heart, his time, his loyalty, without giving her a single chance to know the truth. Without giving her the dignity of choice. "You love me," she whispered. "You love me, Musa. Is that what love is to you?" "Lies. Betrayal. Making me the fool while you played the perfect husband in 2 Lives." Musa took a step forward, reaching for her hands. "Amina, I swear. I wanted to tell you. I just didn't know how. And then time passed, and I was afraid. Afraid of losing you. Afraid of losing them. I never meant for this to happen this way." Amina jerked away from his touch as if his hands were made of fire. "You didn't know how?" Her voice was laced with venom. "No, Musa. You knew exactly how. You just didn't want to face the consequences. You let me believe we had a real marriage. That I was your only wife. That the love we had was special. But the whole time, I was just part of your double life." Musa's shoulders slumped. His eyes, once filled with confidence, with the unwavering charm that had once won her heart, now looked hollow. Defeated. He had no excuses left. No lies to cover the truth anymore. But Amina, she wasn't done. She stepped back, putting space between them. The distance between them now wasn't just physical, it was emotional, irreversible. And yet, deep inside, there was still a question. A question that burned inside her chest like a dying flame. "Tell me something, Musa." Her voice was softer now, almost fragile. "If I had never found out, would you have ever told me?" The room fell silent. A muscle in Musa's jaw twitched. His lips parted, then closed. His hesitation told her everything she needed to know. And in that moment, Amina felt the last piece of her heart shatter. She nodded slowly. "That's what I thought." She turned away from him, walking toward the door. He needed air. She needed space. She needed to get away before the weight of everything crushed her completely. Musa's voice followed her, desperate, broken. "Amina, please, don't leave. Let's talk about this. Let me fix this." She stopped, her hand resting on the doorframe. "Fix this." She turned her head slightly, her voice barely above a whisper. "You can't fix something that was never real." And with that, she walked out. The village was quiet. The night air was cool, wrapping around her like a cold embrace. She didn't know where she was going, she just needed to move. To breathe. To escape the suffocating walls of that house filled with lies. She passed by familiar streets, past the marketplace where she had once laughed with Musa, past the homes of people who had always seen them as the perfect couple. If they only knew the truth. If they only knew the woman they had envied had been nothing more than a shadow in her own marriage. Her feet carried her to the riverbank, the place where she had once sat with Musa beneath the stars, dreaming of their future. A future that had never truly belonged to her. She sank onto the ground, staring at the water, her mind racing. What now? She had spent 10 years loving a man who never truly belonged to her. 10 years building a home that was nothing more than an illusion. 10 years being blind to a reality that had been right in front of her all along. And now she had a choice to make. She could go back. She could stay. She could listen to Musa's apologies, his promises. She could pretend that things could somehow be repaired, that love could fix what deception had broken. She could live in the shadows, knowing she would never be his only one. Or she could leave. Walk away. Choose herself. Amina closed her eyes, feeling the weight of that decision pressing against her heart. The pain was unbearable, the betrayal still raw. But for the first time in years, she realized something. She had been living her life for someone else. She had been making choices based on the illusion of love, on the promises of a man who had never truly been hers to begin with. And now, she had the chance to take that life back. Slowly, she opened her eyes, exhaling a breath she hadn't realized she had been holding. She wiped her tears away, lifting her chin. Amina wasn't broken. She wasn't weak. And she would not let this betrayal define her. As the first light of dawn began to creep over the horizon, Amina made her decision. She would not be Musa's secret. She would not be a second choice. She would not beg for the love of a man who had never been honest with her. She would leave. And this time, she would choose herself. The decision had been made. Amina would leave. She would walk away from the lie that had been her life for the past 10 years. She would take back her freedom, her dignity, her self-respect. And this time, she would not look back. As the sun rose over the village, she stood in her home, no, not her home, just a house filled with broken memories. The walls, the furniture, the kitchen where she had prepared meals with love, the bed where she had slept alone more nights than she could count, it all felt foreign to her now. A place where she had once been happy, but also a place where she had been deceived. She moved slowly, deliberately. Folding clothes, packing them into a small bag. She didn't take much, just what she needed. Everything else, she could leave behind. Because what she needed most now was not something she could carry in a bag. It was something that had been missing for far too long. Peace. Musa had left early that morning, off to wherever he went when he wasn't pretending to be her husband. She didn't care. She didn't want to wait for him, to hear more lies, to be trapped by another round of meaningless apologies. She had given him 10 years. She wouldn't give him another second. Amina walked to the center of the room, letting her eyes wander one last time. She thought about the love she had once felt here. The dreams she had built. The nights she had spent waiting for a man who had never truly been hers. And then, she let it all go. She turned, walked to the door, and stepped outside. The village was alive with morning energy. Women carried baskets of fruits and vegetables, children ran through the streets, laughter filled the air. To them, it was just another ordinary day. But to Amina, it was the first day of a new life. She walked with purpose, her heart steady, her mind clear. She was leaving behind more than just a man, she was leaving behind the version of herself who had waited. Who had trusted. Who had believed in a love that never truly existed. But as she approached the main road, a voice stopped her in her tracks. Amina. Her breath caught for just a moment. She knew that voice. She had once loved that voice. Slowly, she turned. Musa stood there, his face pale, his expression unreadable. His eyes flickered from her face to the bag in her hands, realization dawning upon him. "You're leaving," he said, almost as if he couldn't believe it. Amina met his gaze, steady and unshaken. "Yes." Musa took a step closer. "Amina, please, don't do this. We can fix this. I know I made mistakes, but we can rebuild. We can. We." Amina's voice was soft, but firm. "There is no we, Musa. There never was. You didn't love me. You loved the idea of having me. And I loved a man who never truly existed." He swallowed hard, desperation creeping into his voice. "I love you, Amina. I always have." She tilted her head slightly, studying him, the man she had once given her whole heart to. "If you loved me, you would have told me the truth. You wouldn't have let me live in the dark for 10 years. You wouldn't have stolen my choice." His jaw tightened. "I was afraid. And I was blind." Silence stretched between them. The weight of all their years together, of all the love, the lies, the memories, it all hung in the space between them, fragile, untouchable. And then, Amina took a deep breath. "I am not angry anymore, Musa," she said, surprising even herself. I was. For a long time. But now I just want to be free. Musa looked at her, his face unreadable. Perhaps he finally understood. Perhaps he realized that no matter how many words he spoke, no matter how many apologies he offered, there was nothing he could do to fix this. Some things, once broken, could never be put back together. Amina stepped back, turning away. She walked toward the road, toward whatever waited for her beyond this village, beyond this life she was leaving behind. And this time, she didn't look back. Amina didn't know what the future held. She didn't know where this path would take her. But for the first time in 10 years, she was choosing herself. She was walking toward something unknown, but something real. And that was enough. Love is a beautiful thing. But love without honesty is nothing more than a lie. And Amina was done living a lie. She would find her own way. Her own path. And maybe one day, she would find a love that didn't come with secrets. A love that didn't make her feel small, or blind, or betrayed. But until then, she had herself. And that was more than enough. And so, Amina walked away, not just from Musa, but from the life that had kept her bound to deception. She chose herself. She chose truth. She chose freedom. Because in the end, love without honesty is no love at all. And no woman, no person, should ever settle for less than the love and respect they deserve. Thank you for watching today's story. If this tale moved you, if it made you think, if it made you feel something, then make sure to like this video, share your thoughts in the comments, and subscribe for more powerful stories like this one.